Welcome back. Last year, I made a video summarizing my experience playing every numbered Final Fantasy game and its direct sequel. That was a project purely of love by someone who had no idea how to make or edit a video, and now, a year later, I still don't know. But I wanted to put together something to talk about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I got a little distracted in that task by a certain other game I started playing right afterwards, plus moving and the total collapse of the world. But I'm back now, and I wanted to finish this before plunging into all of Final Fantasy XIV's expansions, and I have to do that before the Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering set comes out in June. I struggled a bit with what to say in this video. Some followers of mine when I was streaming haven't had a chance to play all of the other games in the series, and they would have liked me to avoid discussing those. But sadly, I think the only thing I really have to add here is to discuss Rebirth in the context of all of the games that came before. I wanted this video to be about how various aspects of Final Fantasy games have evolved and what all of Square's experience has taught them when they've been refining mechanics. This video is about what Rebirth drew from all of the prior entries in the series. It's not heavy on spoilers for anything but the 7 games, but it will talk about the mechanics and some plot points for others. Let's start off with where I would rank the game on the whole, and we can get right to the tier list. Here's where I place every Final Fantasy prior to Rebirth. This is a very subjective list, and I know it doesn't line up with most other people. 8 just happened to hit me exactly right at the right time, and 11 barely functioned for me. I'll quickly name them in case the thumbnails are not clear, starting with the bottom and working our way up. You can watch my longer video for more detail on each game. 11 was too hard to play, but I hear it's good if you stick with it. After Years was just too repetitive. I haven't played the 14 expansions, and I know that will be higher once I do. 3 is fine, but it doesn't feel special. 2 is unique, but it lacks a certain oomph. 10-2 is a wild experience, but it is fun. 15 is fine, but it feels unfinished. 1 is still fun to replay if you're doing weird party compositions. 5 probably should be higher, but it just didn't click with me on a greater level. 9 was great the first time I played it, but it felt too slow and constrained on replay. Replaying 7 after Rebirth made me like it more than I used to. 13-2 is fun, but it doesn't quite crack the A tier. 13 restricts your exploration too much, but it's gorgeous and it introduces the wonderful stagger mechanic. 12 has a unique combat system that I found a ton of fun to play around with. Lightning Returns tries to get you to stop playing early, but it rewards you if you stick around. 16 has addictive gameplay and a brilliantly told, emotional story. 10 succeeds on every level, and it starts off the S tier. Remake is what made me decide not to hate 7 anymore, and it did a brilliant job with a seemingly impossible task. 8 just resonated with me in a way I know it didn't with most people. 4 is a reflection of my bias, as it's the first one I played, and then 6 is just the greatest game ever made. Nobody would dispute that. The part of the list is sacrosanct. I would put Rebirth right here, at breaking into the S tier. My short summary of Rebirth is that it's basically a perfectly constructed modern open world game that doesn't quite give me the extra feels of the games above it. Remake was bursting with ideas and fantastically brought to life classic characters in new ways, but its gameplay was fairly constrained. It didn't quite have the exploration a Final Fantasy game usually gives. Rebirth adds those missing elements, but its achievement doesn't feel as revolutionary because the truly great work was done in Remake. Rebirth takes a technically perfect modern open world game and layers it on top of what Remake achieved. As a result, it just doesn't feel revolutionary, even though it's amazing. That's why it's S tier, but it's not at the top. Let's go element by element to talk about how it's the product of the games that came before, starting with how it handles character growth. Materia. First up is Materia, which isn't changed much from Rebirth, which in turn was pretty similar to the original game. Materia was a slam dunk evolution in mechanics when it was introduced in 7, and there isn't much that needed to be changed. Earlier games had crystals or espers in this place, letting characters grind ability points to learn new moves. Materia changed things up by giving the ability to the materia and not to the character. I didn't like this in 1997 because I liked being able to level up an ability and be assured that character would always have it. But Materia was a nice solution to the Strago problem, where a late-game character is too far behind all of the ability grinding everyone else has already done, so they get left behind. And then they fall further behind. When Sid joins the party late, you can just hand him leveled up Materia and he's good to go. Rebirth improves this further by having all equipped Materia level up, whether the people it's equipped to are in the party or not. This lets you worry less about leveling materia you don't want to use just yet, but do want to start leveling. Remake didn't let you do this because you never chose your party in Remake. Now, the big downside to this is that you're still juggling materia all the time. One of the worst parts of the original game was trying to constantly manage who had what materia equipped and in what increased growth slot. It was a huge hassle to sort, especially when it often involved materia you weren't even interested in using at the time. Rebirth doesn't make you juggle the materia in and out of active characters, but this means you're now monitoring and juggling materia for the entire party, not just the 3 people you're using. I'm a little surprised this is still something you have to do. The game has very correctly embraced the modern method of shared party experience. No, not that party experience. This is something the series dabbled with in FF12 and fully embraced in FF13. There's just no reason to let unused characters fall behind, since it creates a feedback loop that keeps you away from that character until the next plot point that adjusts everyone's levels. But if we don't have to juggle character experience, why do we still have to do it with materia? Why do I have to spend so much time checking so many materia slots just to make sure all my growth is optimized? I think we're past the point where this is worthwhile, and I think it's time to have all materia, equipped and unequipped, level together. I could see an argument for maybe 1 or 2 growth materia for the few you really, truly want to level faster than others, something the game already has, so long as it's just a few and you aren't juggling too much. But that's nitpicking when the system is, on the whole, very solid. I really like the customization the materia lets you have in this game. I still think FF9 has the best ability grinding system. It's linked to each character, so it does have the Strago problem, but it plays really smoothly, and because it's only relevant for characters you're actually using, you don't have to juggle as much stuff around all the time, a problem made worse by the inactive party leveling materia in Rebirth. Weapon skills. I have nothing bad to say about the other item-based ability grinding in this game, weapon skills. I think these are perfectly designed and subtly move the player to do things the designers want. When a character gets a new weapon, it comes with a new ability the character can use while that weapon is equipped. Use that ability enough times in combat, the character learns it permanently. It's similar on a smaller scale to the FF9 system that I already said I loved. It doesn't take very many uses to learn the ability permanently, so it almost never feels like an imposition, except for that one Aerith ability, you know the one. What it does instead is prompt you to use the new ability enough times you can see if you like it. I assume most players are like me and obsessively wanting to learn all the abilities permanently when you get them, so they're encouraged to use them several times in short order. By the time you've learned the ability, you either have a new favorite attack or you can safely stash it away in your memory for emergencies. It's really a returning mechanic from Remake, but due to differences in gameplay, it's much more important here. In Remake, you never selected your own party. You were just testing out the ability when you leveled it. In Rebirth, however, getting a new weapon for Red 13 means you put Red in your party until he learns that ability. That means you aren't just testing the new ability, you're also testing Red again. I tended not to run him in my parties, but I enjoyed dusting him off from time to time for a new weapon. Sometimes it would make me gain a whole new appreciation for his moveset. That's why I think this is a brilliant design. It's fun, it doesn't impose on the player, and it nudges the player towards behavior the designers would like to see, trying out new characters and abilities. Skill tree. I have less nice to say about the other character customization mechanic, the folio. It's this game's skill tree, and it's not great. Everything else in this game feels so polished, but the folio just seems unfinished. It feels a bit like the trance system in 9, where I get the concept, but it just feels like they didn't iterate on it enough. It's probably an improvement on the weapon upgrade system from Remake, but that isn't saying much. The weapon upgrade system was cumbersome to manage, since you had to go inside each weapon and adjust things. But the folio system, if it's better than that, it's still a bad implementation of a skill tree. The first issue is the inability to zoom out. The field of view on it is weirdly close, making it more burdensome than it needs to be to figure out where you want to go on it and where you've been on the other side. If I missed a way to zoom out, please let me know in the comments. I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments. The second strange thing is that you can only update it at bookstores, or 99% of the time, a folio kiosk at a bench. I really have no idea why they thought updating your skill tree whenever you wanted, like you can in FF16, was too powerful. I assume it was so that you wouldn't respec between fights in a dungeon, but why? You can already do that when you find a bench. It's a bizarre decision. Figuring out which synergies in the folio increase limit levels is also more annoying than it needs to be. And the random nodes are just not exciting. A lot of them are incredibly small upgrades, like 3 extra MP. 3 MP is half of a cure spell. And you don't even get to grab a new node every level. Players who want to min-max every last percent will know that there is a huge value to a 3% weapon ability increase or something like that, but Even as someone who appreciates the value here, it just doesn't generate much dopamine for me. Plus 100 luck is exciting, but that one felt a little out of place. Many of the other skills are synergies that you'll never use because you won't have Red 13 and Barret in the same party all that often. And I'm not doing perfect blocks with Yuffie basically ever. Some of this is on me, as I didn't really engage that much with these synergy moves or learn how to use them to up my limit break levels until fairly late in the game. The good part of the skill tree, and one of the better additions to the game, is that it has various pseudo-spell abilities for each element that don't cost MP, letting you have access to a fire spell all the time should Cloud randomly need to use one without a fire materia equipped. In past games, not having the right element equipped could be a problem, and this works to ameliorate that. Of course, that doesn't help if you didn't pick that up on Cait Sith and now you unexpectedly have to use him and you didn't give him that element. Still, if you give Cloud all 4 elements, or 2 of them in Firebolt Blade, it's pretty convenient. Customization in Rebirth is ultimately about your materia mix and playstyle more than what you get out of the folio, which is weird because skill trees are normally where you customize. In Final Fantasy XVI, the skill tree was an easy to view, easy to use set of skills for your icons. I made a stagger-based build that heavily influenced my playstyle, and even minor changes to what skills I had could make a big difference in how fights played out. Other than grabbing elemental abilities, I don't know what the folio really changed for me. That said, I'm well aware of the small edges of seemingly minor abilities that can probably be put together to make a totally busted build. But on a normal playthrough that wasn't spending a lot of time doing that, it just seemed pointless. If we compare this to the skill trees in other Final Fantasy games, we see where it's lacking most of the fun those games got out of it. In fairness, those games were generally not using materia and weapon abilities, so they were trying to do more just off of the skill tree. The first skill tree in a numbered Final Fantasy game is the Sphere Grid in 10. That one was trying to do a little bit too much, as a simple glance at it shows you. It's how you leveled, got stat boosts, got new abilities, and got spells. It's doing everything by itself. It was very intimidating at first, but it turned out to be fine in practice and gave you interesting choices to make about what paths to go down for each character. The choices were much more meaningful with the Sphere Grid, but you couldn't respect people and frequently had to backtrack. I messed up Kimahri's path at one point early on, and I just kind of let him fall by the wayside, and I rarely used him for the rest of the game, aside from his poke each combat to get him experience. The licensing board in 12 was, as anyone who saw my last video knows, not something I enjoyed. It was only half of how you leveled because you also had straight character leveling, which was not shared on party experience. The licensing board was terrible flavor. You're outlaws! Why do you need a license? And it was annoyingly hard to figure out where to find things. The countless levels of accessories bogged it down, and having to get an item and then also get it in the board was just an awful play experience. The folio was a definite improvement on that. The Crystarium took us back to the Sphere Grid for being a one-stop leveling tool with stat boosts and abilities. The stat boosts tended to at least feel more meaningful than the comically low amount of extra MP the folio gives you, in part because you're just getting more nodes on it more often. The Crystarium was also a little confusing to navigate, but at least it looked neat, and it really helped to differentiate the characters when you started. It was an improvement on the licensing board, but no better than on par with the Sphere Grid, which differentiated people early by having the characters start in different places. 15 is where we got closer to what skill trees tend to look like in modern games, as the purpose was almost entirely to do neat, interesting bonuses rather than minor stat increases. You could navigate the trees in 15 pretty easily, making it the most visually streamlined of all the skill trees to that point. It also made it pretty clear what you were building towards in each tree, so you had dreams to pursue. But I think the best skill tree system Final Fantasy has had so far is 16's. You aren't following it linearly like some of the others, so it's debatable whether it's even really a skill tree, but from a practical standpoint, it was pretty similar. You gained ability points, you put them in increasingly expensive things. This was a great skill tree because every time you spent points, it did something relevant, even if it was just upgrading one you had, and each new skill was a huge change to your game. I felt like my Clive build was a very personal one, tailored to my playstyle and my preferences. The DLC even added a fun new one that felt like it fit in nicely. This was a skill tree system that felt personalized without feeling like you're just trying to min-max off of very specific things. You could also change it anywhere and at any time with no penalty, so you were really allowed to just have fun experimenting. I think the lesson future Final Fantasy games should take from past skill trees is to make it much more impactful every single time you spend points. If you would have a plus 3 MP spot, you can just not do that. The plus 100 luck one was funny, so you can keep that. But ditch the minor edges and keep a skill tree pure for, well, skills or unique passive features. Make it easy to switch builds so experimentation is encouraged. As we saw in 16, you don't even need to have all that many skills to buy. It's better off without the padding. Limit breaks. The limit breaks are perfectly fine. The original Final Fantasy VII was already a great implementation of a limit break, better than the complete randomness of the near-death attacks in Final Fantasy VI, which are so rare I don't even think I have footage of them, or the frequent uselessness of their timing in Final Fantasy IX. It's not as abusable as the ones in 8 or 12, as much as I loved the tension of keeping people low and in crisis mode in 8. The innovation here is that you need to use synergy moves to go up a level. I somehow didn't learn this until much later than I should have, but I liked how they played once I used them better. There was a nice, powerful feeling to using the higher level ones. Staggering. Staggering didn't exist in the original Final Fantasy VII, and it was one of my favorite additions in Remake, which I saw people play long before I played 13. I've liked Staggering in all the games where it's appeared, except that it felt a little random in 15. I feel like it's been a little different each time it's appeared in a game, and I like that. I used to dislike older games that had brief windows where you could actually damage the boss. As a child, I found it stressful to have the whole fight build to one moment that could be missed if your timing was bad, and then having to start over. That was the case with Rexol's Possession or the final boss of Chrono Trigger. For some reason, Staggering is just more exciting to me, despite being functionally pretty similar. It might be because you can see it coming more easily and it feels like a reward to deal extra damage instead of a punishment that you can't harm them normally most of the time. Finding out what move pressures an enemy and then exploiting that added some fun strategy. I missed the ability to make builds focused on staggering like in Lightning Returns in Final Fantasy XVI, but all of them were fun. Crafting. I'm not sure I've ever liked a Final Fantasy crafting system other than the card mods in Final Fantasy VIII. I'd rather just loot the cool item instead of seeing it tantalizingly on a crafting screen where I can't obtain it until I fight the one boss that drops the rare item it needs. Do I care about the 30 sprigs of parsley if the only part that really matters is the unique drop from a side quest that isn't available yet? Just have the side quest give me the item. Final Fantasy XVI was the worst in that regard. But Final Fantasy VIII actually let you get Squall's ultimate weapon on Disc 1 if you cared enough, which is exactly how I want this kind of thing to play out. This game has crafting because every game has to have crafting now, and it's fine. It's better than the insanely complicated method in Final Fantasy XIII, and it's better than the completely pointless one in Final Fantasy XVI. At least it had a really good interface to let you see what you'd already made and what you hadn't made yet. But overall, it just felt like they could have skipped the levels of experience here and just let you make individual items, since your experience is gated by the plot anyway. The game is already stuffed with so much, this really just didn't feel necessary. Open world. Final Fantasy games are almost all open world, going back to the original. That very first game still funneled you through several content gates. You can't go anywhere but Garland until you build the bridge, and there isn't a ton to see until you get the ship, and so on. In the beginning, Final Fantasy games are frequently very linear with the illusion of the ability to walk around and explore a very small amount. You can see Materia before you get the boat, or you can do your first chocobo hot and cold while very much being in a corridor otherwise. Starting exploration in those games is really more within towns than between them until you follow some sequence like build the bridge, get the ship, get the airship, each unlocking just a little bit more. On a first run, those worlds can feel really open because it's not necessarily obvious that you can't go anywhere meaningfully different each time. Later runs would have me realize how linear Final Fantasy IV was before the airship, for example. That does make me really appreciate the ones that do let you explore a ton right off the bat. It's a small detail, but in Final Fantasy VIII you can cut class on your appointment with Quistis and just catch a train ride to a whole other area right at the start. There's nothing to do there, but it lets you, and I like that. Final Fantasy XII felt fairly open at the start, even though everything would kill you if you wandered off too much at first. Final Fantasy XV is probably the most open right from the get-go. 13 is the obvious exception to the series being open world, except for that one fairly brief portion on Pulse. But Lightning Returns goes in the opposite direction and is closer to 12 or 15 after the intro corridor. 7 Remake is also extremely linear, but that has more to do with the portion of the original it's covering. You couldn't plausibly describe 7 Remake as an open world game under most definitions that I would use. So not everyone shares my preference for this, I'm sure, but I think the ability to explore early is, broadly speaking, desirable. Remake surprised me with how great the experience was despite being on rails so much. Rebirth is fully open world, but in the way most open world games are these days. It's an extremely Ubisoft Assassin's Creed style open world. You get a sandbox to explore, but you're locked into that sandbox until you move the main plot enough to access the second sandbox, at which point you're plot gated until the third sandbox, and so on. That's the most common Final Fantasy style after all, and the sandboxes you're locked into line up with the movement of the plot in the original. I might personally wish you could wander all the way to Nibelheim right at the start, but that wouldn't make much sense with the story. And the Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XV model is pretty rare and probably very hard to pull off. The sheer size and scale of the sandboxes also means you can do an absurd amount in the first region of Rebirth before the plot gate even matters. My biggest criticism of Rebirth's open world is the standardization of the sandboxes. Final Fantasy is always a little standardized in an area. This town has a weapon shop, an armor shop, an item shop, a magic shop, and an inn. But it gets a little comical structurally with Rebirth. You get to a new area and you know what it's going to look like. You find towers that reveal the map, and those put icons on your map that tell you where you can find things. Each new zone feels like a similar process of finding towers, running to the icons, and then getting the proto-relic piece or the life spring or the chocobo. Also, why are the life spring ones just the exact same thing each time? That they're even towers makes it feel even more Assassin's Creed-like, and I say that as someone who would list Assassin's Creed 2 as one of my all-time favorite games. Side quests pop up so that you can't miss them. Like Final Fantasy XVI, it dumps a gigantic number of side quests on you right at the end, as everyone you helped throughout the game now has a final wrap-up quest. This is what modern games do in place of what most of the first 8 Final Fantasy games would do. The early games have a montage during the ending of all the people you helped and places you went. Having final side quests instead makes a lot of sense, but as a practical matter, it grinds the story to a halt just when it was hitting its crescendo. I saw plenty of streamers slump over at all the quest icons that appeared in 16 right when they were ready for the final boss, and I saw them do that again here with Rebirth. When I first ran into a Zone Eater in Final Fantasy VI back in 1994, it blew my mind because I wasn't expecting anything there. A quest marker would have ruined that experience. After Final Fantasy XVI, I played Baldur's Gate 3 for the first time, and after Rebirth, I played Elden Ring for the first time. Both of those games felt more like the original Final Fantasy VII as far as side quests are concerned. In the original game, you have to find things. When I first played it, I definitely missed a gigantic amount. I played Baldur's Gate 3 all the way through 3 times, and each additional run featured something I hadn't seen before and didn't know about. The map marks quests for you once you have the quest, but it doesn't tell you where to find quests. If you miss something, you can always find it next time. And watching a streamer play will present you with many surprise moments as they find something totally new to you. Elden Ring takes that to 11, and even more than Baldur's Gate, it does not care if you completely miss half the content. As a kid, I could replay earlier Final Fantasies and expect to see something I'd missed the first time. Granted, some of that is from being a kid, but I came away from my first and so far only run in Rebirth, just like I did in 16, feeling like I'd played the whole game, aside from hard mode challenges I just didn't care about. I'd occasionally use the internet to find something like that darn griffin in 16, but I had to know about it to look for it. In Baldur's Gate or Elden Ring, I would have simply missed it entirely without knowing it existed. It's easy to see why developers want you to see all of the content they put so much effort into making, and Rebirth certainly has replay value to try different party compositions, among many other things. But after beating the game and then Gilgamesh, I just didn't feel like there was anything I needed to see aside from videos of the other dates. I could be wrong, and I could have missed plenty of wonderful Easter eggs, but I imagine anything I missed was, well, an Easter egg and not a great new discovery. So in that way, I think those two games are closer to the original Final Fantasy VII experience than Rebirth is. And that's not always a bad thing. Games are so long now, who has time to replay a 100-hour game? Except that I did play Baldur's Gate again multiple times and played around with a second character in Elden Ring, and then I paused that character to start an entire new run just to beat it without any summons. As someone obsessive, I like feeling like I can put a bow on a game when it's done, but I also like coming back to it and finding a quest that I never knew about. I dived right back into Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring, and I didn't do that with Rebirth, even though I was more than happy with the game. And I spent 116 hours on that one run of Rebirth, making it cost me far less than $1 per hour of entertainment. I'm okay with feeling like I'm done after 116 hours. It just feels like it's missing a little something extra special compared to Baldur's Gate 3 or Elden Ring. Minigames! Of the non-MMO mainline Final Fantasy games, none have even attempted the volume of minigames the original Final Fantasy VII had. Until now. Most content themselves with one major one and a couple minor ones, in contrast with a whole theme park full of them in 7. I think that's for the best, as I wasn't fond of all the mandatory gameplay interruptions they caused, and I hated repetitively running chocobo races to get Knights of the Round. Rebirth easily surpasses the original for minigames with over 24, and I think it does a fantastic job with them. I didn't love all of the minigames, and some of them certainly created unnecessary slogs to gate side content, but the highs were very high. And the highest of those is the game's main minigame, Queen's Blood. I've played Magic the Gathering for 28 years, so this was right up my alley. I ignored Triple Triad for the most part when I first played Final Fantasy VIII, but I dove straight into it on my second run, and I loved it. Tetramaster I didn't care for on either of the FF9 runs I've done. I think part of the mistake Square made in 9 was that you have to play Tetramaster and win at least a few matches, whereas in Final Fantasy VIII it correctly just lets you pass on Triple Triad entirely if that's what you want to do. I don't know how much you can avoid Queen's Blood because I never wanted to avoid it. You have to play on the ship, but I don't know if it requires that you win because, well, I wanted to win and I won. If you have to win, and it's hard to win if you skipped a whole bunch of playing earlier, it would be a mistake in my view to require that you win there. Whenever I got to a new area, I wanted to play Queen's Blood as quickly as possible, and once the story hinted at the dark origin to the game, I was even more invested. I could gush more, but from a design standpoint, I don't know what lessons to even talk about here. It's just brilliantly implemented. It's got addictive music like Triple Triad and the fantastic addition of commentary during games. Cloud's very flat comments during games when it sounded as though he was maybe a little nervous or unsure, they just felt absolutely perfect to me. Just a fantastic choice. It really fit the character as a kind of meta-commentary on minigames the player doesn't care about that much. The biggest problem with Queen's Blood was that there weren't that many people to play against compared with Triple Triad or Tetramaster where there were tons of players throughout the game. This makes sense because each Queen's Blood opponent was more involved than just playing a single game of fairly random cards, both in terms of their dialogue and how their playstyle was developed, but it was something I wanted more of. But that's a good problem to have, as it means I enjoyed the game so much I wanted more. The other minigames are a mixed bag, but they're mostly good. Some return from Remake and its DLC, like Fort Condor, the motorcycle, destroying boxes, and the mechanics of the parade. Almost all of them are fun, and most don't have to be done in a high or even mildly competent level to advance the game. I wanted to do well on most of them, so if I got stuck for a while, it was because I wanted a high score, not because the game made me. When I just wanted to perform at a minimum level and move on with the game, I could. There are a few exceptions to that, though, such as the Proto-Relic side quests, which require you to perform well in both Fort Condor and Gears and Gambits to advance. I find this bad because you're already invested in the Proto-Relic quests before it starts throwing mandatory minigames at you, and since it's a whole questline, it doesn't really feel optional to just skip part of it. You don't miss out on much if you don't want to jump as a frog until you get good at it, but having to stop the Greg quests because you get stuck on Gears and Gambits is not great. The Fort Condor one I can excuse because it was at least in intermission in the original game, so people expect it, and they may have some practice with it. But Gears and Gambits, it just required more effort. I'm sure some people are reacting to that comment with, but it's not hard to learn Gears and Gambits. My objection isn't really that it's hard, it's that it requires me to learn it. I really liked Final Fantasy XII and its Gambit system, but that was a whole game built around figuring out your ideal programming for your party. Having to figure out all the things you need to do for a minigame that you'll never play again after it's done is, well, it's a tax on my time, and I didn't appreciate that. The first two Gears levels were easy enough, I could just do whatever and get past them, but the third one required me to actually know what I was doing to advance the story. Thankfully, the internet was there for me by telling me you can just shuffle the automatic gambits until you get cheap red units and spam nothing but those until you win. When I look at my list of the minigames, though, I enjoyed almost all of them, with the chocobo racing genuinely enjoyable in contrast to the chore it felt like in the original. I feel bad not going through them one by one, but that would eat up a lot of time for this video. This level of minigames would be bad if every game had it. I wouldn't want them to say, well, this worked in Rebirth, so now Final Fantasy XVII has to have 20 minigames. 16 was sadly lacking in minigames, but if it had half as many as Rebirth, I probably would have been burned out on minigames by the time Rebirth came out. So I think Square has learned correctly that you can't stuff every game with them, and it's best to have just one be the main focus in a game. Characters. Most of the main characters already had their core personality changes if they were going to have any made in Remake, but I want to note a few of Rebirth's changes for characters who either weren't in or only sort of in Remake. First, Red 13. Red was in Remake, but only briefly and not as a playable character. I really liked Remake's rendition of him. As a playable character, I think his mechanics are interesting, even if I never bothered to learn how to use Vengeance mode, and I really liked how he acted. Until the reveal that he's actually very young. In the original game, I don't remember too many differences in his dialogue to mark a shift in his speaking in the English translation. Here, he sounds old and wise with a deep voice, and then when his real nature as the equivalent of a teenager is revealed, he switches to, well, a 16-year-old style voice. This was a cute moment, but my biggest objection is that he sticks with this voice for the rest of the game. And frankly, I found it annoying compared to his previous voice, which I loved. I get why he's doing it, and as character growth, this is great, but it was just less fun to listen to, and it often sounded a little silly with his combat lines. I think they should have learned from Remake just how great that version of him was and had him go back to his adult voice when just with the group. Instead, in my opinion, it trades away a character I really liked for one comic moment of surprise. Even with the element of Red actually being someone young, he was doing that deep voiced wisdom before, and he could still be doing it with other characters if he wanted to without doing too much violence to what's at the core of his character. Next, Cait Sith. In the original game, Cait Sith's betrayal has this absurd moment where he threatens to hurt Marlene, and then he says we should all just pretend it didn't happen and move on, Seymour style. That didn't make sense in 1997, and it would make even less sense in a modern game with full voice acting that takes itself even more seriously than the original does. I think it was a really good change to have the group cast him out, because there's no way they would forgive him enough to let him hang around here, and his character would also have been hurt too much by having him threaten a child in this version. It's probably a bummer for players who actually used him in their main group and had to do the final dungeon without him, but I think it's a good change. I wasn't a huge fan of some of the mechanics with him, but I didn't hate him either, and I liked that they experimented with a radically different style of play. Also, I didn't know until I watched Advent Children in 2020 that he was supposed to have a Scottish accent, and I enjoyed listening to it here. And this brings us to Cid. After what happens with Aerith, the thing I most wanted to see for Rebirth was how they would treat Cid. In the original, as I noted in my first video, Cid is an awful, awful person. You just couldn't implement that version of Cid in this game and have him be a party member anyone wanted to be around. In the end, the solution was to make Cid a completely different character. Then again, even in the original, it felt like there were two Cids. The main map Cid looks older with gray hair and he runs around in a pretty silly way, but in combat he looks much younger and he's blonde. Rebirth goes with the younger version of Cid, and it's changed basically everything about him except that he was a pilot with the tiny Bronco and he has a southern accent. Aside from a passing reference to an interest in space at the Space Shooter Gallery in the Golden Saucer, he's just a normal pilot here. His entire rocket town is gone, and there's no reference at all to Shira. As a character, he's amiable, almost weirdly so, in a huge shift from his abrasive nature in the original. And I'm totally fine with this change. The old Cid was unpleasant, so much so you'll see in my Final Fantasy VII footage that I named him Worst Cid, which is an achievement when so many of the other Final Fantasy Cids are war criminals. One wonderful detail. Cid falls asleep during Loveless, which seems a little out of place when everyone is enjoying it so much, but in the original, Cid has a line about how he once fell asleep during Loveless. This Cid never really joins the party, even in an unplayable context like Red 13 does in Remake. That's also a good change, since the game already has a lot of characters and he, like Red in Remake, is introduced pretty late. It's a good solution to the Strago problem. As with Red 13 and Cait Sith, Cid gets a new dimension by being voice acted. I also didn't know until Advent Children that he was supposed to have a southern United States accent, because it didn't come across in the PS1 translation, just like Nanaki and Cait Sith's dialogue boxes didn't clue me into how they were speaking. Meanwhile, I would have liked to try playing Vincent, but he never joins the party even though he hangs around, much like Cid. This part needed to be explained more because he's just sort of there and he doesn't do anything. Cid at least is the pilot, even though he's not fighting. I wish Vincent had been with the other characters not in the active party and at least contributed to some extent in combat. You know, like the characters you have that are not in your active group and are still firing into combat. His presence just doesn't make much sense, even though, again, adding a character at that stage and making you learn to play them would be a bit much. I look forward to actually playing him in the next part. Of course, I loved Matt Mercer's performance, unsurprisingly, and I loved that they made him a bit of a parody of himself, since in the original his brooding takes it up to such a high level that he sleeps in a coffin. The other characters from the original introduced here are great, especially Dio, although Elena seemed oddly mean and was rude even to Rufus. And Bugenhagen was just a huge ass. Zack is perfectly the Zack from Crisis Core. I loved him there and I loved him here. No notes. Yuffie was in the remake DLC, but I wanted to note a change for her here. In the original game, she's basically a sociopath, displaying no empathy and frequently an almost sadistic callousness. But here, she at times serves as the conscience of the group, standing up for Barrett when the people of Corel mistreat him. She's much kinder and more empathetic, despite an added scene where she, well, attempts literal murder. I like that change, even though I'm sure they could have gotten a lot of comic mileage from her amorality, which the game does play with a little bit before she joins you. Story. My biggest disappointment in the game is the ending. This game did a great job with every little moment, every bit of superb voice acting, all of the great character writing, and so on, but I felt like it dropped the ball on the big moment that we were all waiting for. The ending is beautifully done, but it just keeps throwing fake outs at you. The big story part everyone was waiting for was what would happen to Aerith. It was such a big topic of speculation that the New York Times had an article a few days before the game came out at the top of their website about how that iconic scene might play out. And I have to confess, I don't remember what my reaction was to the original scene in the 90s. Since I put the game aside for a long time partway through, I don't know if I had heard about it by the time I finally got that far in the game. It's possible it was spoiled for me, but it might not have been. All I can say for sure is that I had no strong emotional reaction to it the way everyone else did. However, Remake's Aerith, so brilliantly voiced by Brianna White, absolutely won me over. It didn't take long after her introduction in Remake before I desperately wanted her to survive this time, if not just so the character can hang around longer. And I must say, I was very pleasantly surprised by the fact that the internet didn't spoil this for me. I had a slow start getting through Rebirth because the rest of my life was just busy, and I didn't finish until nearly 2 months after it came out. But somehow nothing gave away any part of the game's story for me, not even the dreaded Google autofill where you're trying to find out how to use someone's abilities. I'm not entirely sure how to read the ending because I don't know where it's going. If they killed Aerith again, but we still get to enjoy her character as a hallucination of clouds, that would be a pretty good way to stay true to the original while giving us more of White's fantastic performance. I'm a little concerned the ending implies Cloud is leaving her behind, which would just be a big loss for Part 3. My real disappointment comes from the scene of her death itself. I was just very unhappy they did a fake out. This is the big scene everybody's waiting for, and they build it up to Cloud saving her, and then he saves her, but he doesn't save her. That wasn't how I wanted them to handle it. I think fake outs are bad because they erode audience trust in what's happening, and they went with 2, maybe even 3 fake outs over Aerith's presence. To explain why I don't like fake outs, I was raised to root for the Cleveland Browns NFL team. They've been bad basically my whole life, but if you watch an individual game in a crowded bar, it can still be fun because they might win. But I found over time I couldn't enjoy watching the games as much because their sloppy play led to a lot of flags. For those unfamiliar with American football, if there's a foul on the play indicated by a referee throwing a flag, the play will usually be completely undone. This means we'd see the Browns have a fantastic play where they gained 40 yards and the whole bar would go wild, only for a flag to appear on the field because someone not even actively involved in that play held someone for no reason. So after a while, my friends would go wild and I would sit there without reactions, shaking my head and saying, "Wait for the flag." It basically meant I couldn't enjoy any amazing play in the moment because I had to wait to see whether it was real or not. And that's why I hate fake outs. I don't want to have to sit here and not feel what the scene wants me to feel while I look for the little clues around the screen as to whether it's actually happening. This is even worse in the internet era when no one wants to look like the idiot who gets fooled by the fake out. For the second fake out, I noticed the flash as Cloud walked to Aerith, indicating to me something weird was going on, but I still didn't think she would wake up and talk to him, so you can see my eyebrows shoot up in this clip. Other people may not dislike this sort of moment as much as I do, and maybe they like getting excited even if the ref will throw the flag later. But it's not to my taste, and as a result, the biggest story moment in the game just felt flat to me. Also, certain other Final Fantasy games that I love very much have also used fake-out deaths that minimize the impact of the story, but I won't say which, as this video is meant to contain only Final Fantasy VII spoilers. I didn't like it in those either. I'm also not a big fan of the reveal that there are lots of worlds of Final Fantasy VII here. I think it's less interesting and unique than what seemed to me to be happening in Remake, where I thought that the reason the characters were having these flashes of future events was because Sephiroth had somehow respun time to make everything play out again, and this time he's hoping for a different result. Instead, it seems like it may just be a multiverse, and multiverses kind of had their big moment in pop culture a few years ago, and the concept feels a little tired at the moment. But we don't know where this is going yet, and it might be much more interesting than it looked. I'll reiterate that this is largely a personal preference, and I don't view it as a poor quality ending by any means. The fight itself was mostly really cool, and the Zack Cloud team-up was phenomenal. It's just that the fake-outs held back my enthusiasm. Difficulty. How hard is a Final Fantasy game usually? There's a wide variation. I'm told Final Fantasy III on the Famicom is the actual hardest, and it seems like it would be given how hard Final Fantasy I was on the NES. But a lot of that comes from the inability to save and how far back you have to go when you die. When I played Final Fantasy III for the first time, I didn't know if the version that I was playing, which was the 3D remake on my iPad, would respawn me if I died in the absurdly long final dungeon. So it was an extremely tense and stressful experience as I got to the final boss, which I did beat on my first try. So I actually still don't know what would have happened. The Pixel remaster did not feel particularly hard to me except for certain boss fights, mostly optional ones like Leviathan. Of the games that I have played in the versions of those games that I played, the two contenders for hardest game are Final Fantasy I on the NES and Final Fantasy XIII, which I played on Steam. No other version of Final Fantasy I has been particularly hard, even the original on the NES Classic, thanks to save states and my knowledge of the game. The Pixel remaster was borderline easy with its accelerated leveling. 13 managed to be really hard, even with more generous saving. The fights are long and they require quick thinking and reflexes when changing paradigms. I felt an extreme sense of accomplishment beating the second phase of the final boss. On the other hand, the easiest game for me was, without question, Final Fantasy XV. As long as you have lots of elixirs, it's almost impossible to die, and I think it only happened a few times in my whole run. If any side content I didn't do was hard, well, I can't speak to that. I can only speak to the main story, which is mostly what I'm focused on here. Likewise, 12 was extremely easy for me, but I didn't do the notorious bonus bosses because I was ready for the game to be done after I got Histaga, which wasn't hard so much as absolutely miserable. 16 had an interesting ability to make each boss feel like you might die, but then you wouldn't die and you would get it on the first try. The only really hard challenges in that game were the S tier bounties, and only if you did them immediately. There was a later S tier I got on the first try without breaking a sweat. I would say that Rebirth is a similar difficulty level to 16 in that way. It's tense because you could lose, but you won't most of the time. In a lot of the monster hunting challenges, the real difficulty is getting the objectives before the fight ends. I beat the final boss and Gilgamesh on the first try, and I don't think I was over-leveled or anything. I saw streamers really struggle with the final phase of Sephiroth, so I may have just gotten lucky with when I staggered him. But for everyone I saw, the hardest part of the final fight, not in terms of dying, but in terms of sheer misery, was figuring out how to hurt the damn wings. The instructions you get are slightly contradictory, and your team might not have all the elements you need aside from Yuffie's. You also can't easily see the wings to tell if your attacks are working. It felt too much like fake difficulty combined with it just took too long. If you die, you can restart at the phase you were on, just like in 16. That's necessary when fights are as long as they get to be in this game. One of the most deflating moments of 13 was the first fight against Bart, where it went on for ages and then I died and I had to do the whole thing over again. It let me restart on the second phase of the final boss, thankfully, but in general, I want my difficulty not to come from wasted time between attempts. It's why I really appreciated Elden Ring putting its graces right next to bosses. The real difficulty in Rebirth is the combat simulator, especially if you do summon fights before depowering them, and also the summon fights to unlock Greg. I really enjoyed the difficulty of the summon pairs, which had a great Soulsborne vibe of really having to learn that fight and come up with a strategy for that fight. I even put those fights on hold at first because the recommended level was so high until chat told me it wasn't actually as bad as it looked from the first try, where I misunderstood how the revival worked with Phoenix and I thought it was going to be a lot harder. I wouldn't want the whole game to be that hard because this isn't Elden Ring, and I don't think it should be. In my opinion, the game might be a tad too far on the easy side for a base playthrough on the normal difficulty, but I think they knew what they were doing in calibrating it, and I can't say they're wrong to put it where it is. Miscellany. At first, I made fun of the fact that you have to have cushions to use the benches outdoors, but then, before I even finished the game, the woman I was dating at the time told me she had to go to urgent care because she sat on a park bench, got a splinter, and it got infected. So, touche, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Touche. There's an unfortunate commonality to the way a lot of dialogue is done in games these days. Final Fantasy XVI and Baldur's Gate 3 both do the very standard, "We're here from the waist up, now let me hand you a thing under the camera." Rebirth, however, has much more dynamic conversations. I really appreciated the extra effort in making all of the dialogue just seem more active. I really liked the Upper Junon area, and I was annoyed that you're only there fairly briefly and that you don't really return for any reason or have a fast travel point there. We knew the music would be amazing in this game, but it amuses me that now the best version of Battle on the Big Bridge is from a Final Fantasy VII game in a fight that doesn't even take place on a bridge. Having characters not in the party participate from the sidelines was a really nice detail that makes more sense than them having somehow disappeared when a fight starts. The idea that chocobos look like Cloud was a detail that was already in the original, as was Yuffie's motion sickness and Rude's bald bar, and I just loved all of those details. The whole Gungaga zone felt like a troll. Sometimes trolls are good in games, as I think it creates a bonding experience among people who've played the game to commiserate over it, but they could have made it a little bit less of a troll. As with the original, summons can feel like attacks on your time, so I didn't use them on many occasions purely out of impatience. In general, I think the summon mechanics here are fine, but they never felt all that special as they felt a little clunky to control because you use your own ATB for them. I really liked Final Fantasy XVI, but I was happy to get back to the sillier side of Final Fantasy. Obviously, the voice acting in this game is absolutely stellar. I really liked the moment when they had Cloud being controlled by Sephiroth being rude to Aerith near the end. It was just an individual small moment that I really wanted to share my appreciation for. Conclusion! Every Final Fantasy game tries something new, and I love how willing the series is to make changes to a winning formula. Square iterates constantly, and Rebirth in some ways feels like a compilation of all the lessons they've learned from dozens of prior entries. Every element is at or near the top of the series with only a few exceptions. The folio was a miss, and a little weirdly so, because it didn't feel like a big enough experiment to justify being so far off target. I also didn't care for the fake outs, but the rest of the ending was pretty spectacular, as I said. Otherwise, Final Fantasy VII
Rebirth
exceeded my lofty expectations, and now that this video is done, I'm excited to try to rush through as many of the Final Fantasy XIV expansions as I can before the Magic the Gathering set comes out, or they spoil too many cards that reveal plot twists, which has already happened to me with Emmett Cell. See you next time.